Hi, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Wave with Friends, brought to you by IGDA Winnipeg. I'm Corey King, one of the IGDA co-chairs, and we're coming to you live with Daniel Vaught, the other co-chair, doing all of the technical work in the back end to bring this show to you. Before I introduce the show and then let it go on to the true talents of the night, I'll just tell you a little bit about IGDA Winnipeg. So IGDA Winnipeg is the Winnipeg chapter of the International Game Developers Association, which is the world's largest nonprofit membership organization serving all individuals who create games. Specifically for us in Winnipeg, our mission is to support and empower game developers in Manitoba by building an inclusive community, providing educational opportunities, and increasing awareness of the local industry. In terms of increasing awareness, this show actually is an example of that. So far, every show that we've produced in the last year or so from IGDA through Twitch, that we've broadcast through Twitch, has been like sort of IGDA working collaboratively to form a show or deciding on a show and finding people to do it. This one actually came from the speakers. They came to us wanting to do a show and a broadcast. And I'm just letting everyone know that to say, hey, if you're someone in Winnipeg who's in an industry related to the game industry and you want to have a platform, this is an example of us being there for you. So just keep that in mind when you watch the show. So what is this show? Wave with Friends essentially is going to be three musicians and audio engineers. All three guys are all three of those talents. And basically, each speaker is going to have their own segment that dives into a specific topic. And I'm going to sort of go through the list of speakers here in a second. All three of those audio compatriots will also hang out while the other person's doing a talk. So a lot of talks we've done has been like, there's a speaker and they have their little box and it's sort of like block gated. The thing that makes this Waves with Friends is that all the friends are there together throughout the whole show. So this is the order that the talks are going to appear, but like I said, all three of these guys are going to be on the air at the exact same time. So first up is Hudson Lee. Hudson Lee has been making music for over a decade and is very enthusiastic about music-related programming and developing for the experimental music scene. You can most often find Hudson working on a project with his cockatoo. Is that the name of the bird?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. I'm glad you were there to make sure I got it right. The hard words come after this when I explain what his talk is about. Anyway, it's on his usually on his shoulder, suggesting music to him. And right before, when we were talking in the back, and I could actually see the bird on his shoulder. So that's like not some kind of branding fakery. He literally has a cockatoo that sits on his shoulder like a pirate, and it's really awesome, in my opinion. So Hudson's part of the show is going to demonstrate how convolvers can be used to put sound into a space and how to use a spectrogram to create textures that are thematically related to space. Did I get that right, Hudson?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Next up is the next speaker in the show is Jesse Hamill. I actually love Jesse's title, Finger Painting with Sound. Makes me feel like someone like me would be able to actually do what he's going to show. So Jesse is a musician, artist, and creator from Winnipeg. He's been experimenting with sound, animation, and video for over 15 years. Along the way, he's been working in the indie cult. He working on the indie cult hit Yo Node 2. I should ask him how to pronounce that before the show as well. And making his dog an international star. Jesse is working on his debut album, and he thinks it's weird to write about himself in the third person, but didn't realize that it was going to be me talking about him in the third person. So I kept that line in there. His talk is about creating interesting textures in a wide variation through resampling and multi-band processing. The final speaker, who everyone in the local Winnipeg community is going to be exceedingly familiar with, is Julian Butel. So Julian's talk is going to be about movodic development in game audio, essentially like themes, how themes come together. Julian is a composer and sound designer for video games, and he's based in Winnipeg, Manitoba. He holds a bachelor in music in jazz trumpet from Brandon University and a master's of fine art in music from the California Institute of Art. He has performed in ensembles of many genres and composed music for film, animated shorts, including An Object at Rest, which was shortlisted for a 2015 Oscar for Best Animated Short. And despite those accolades, somehow he's also working on the game that my company, Zenfry, is making, The Last Taxi. And everything we've put out about his tracks that he's put for that game has been really well received so far, and I think he's a really killer audio engineer and musician. So I hope you like his talk, which is about exploration and manipulation of musical thematic content with the goal of bringing out narrative ideas and creating a cohesive soundtrack for your game. Now, because the game's not out yet, this isn't actually focused on Last Taxi, but I can tell you, he knows what he's talking about in this particular space, because the little sort of strings and little melodies that play and then reemerge. I'm super excited for that soundtrack of that game, just to say that. And Julian is an extremely great talent. So the final thing I'm going to basically say is who else worked on the show, a little bit of credits, and then I'm going to move it on, and you won't see from me again for the rest of the night. So essentially, the Steam the graphics and the logo and everything was created by Christian Miranda. His handle is at Art of Cham, courtesy of Zenfry. The music, Peg Jam Radio, is Julian actually curates Peg Jam Radio. So all that music at the intro and that you hear again at the outro is from Peg Jam Radio. And Julian's handle is Julian Butel, just his name. So that's simple enough. And like I said, me at Corey, Corey _King, and Daniel Voth, who is the other IGDA co-chair with me, at Hyperscope. All right, guys, enjoy the show so much. Follow us, and if you like the show, feel free to subscribe, and have a good night. Thank you.
That's wait, I'm screen sharing, right? Yeah, I'm going first. I am screen sharing. You will have to click to my screen. Yeah, there we go. Yo, no, we're live. I can see myself. My screen is not live though. Okay, hello. All right, so one of the first things I like to do whenever I'm given like a brief for working on something is I like to really try to be aware of, well, the room that stuff in the brief is existing in. So like, when you play a sound in a room, this might seem obvious to a lot of you, but like, the sound will bounce off different walls and it will reflect and it will resonate in certain ways. And depending on how far close you are to the sound, you're going to hear more high end or low end. Like obviously, if you're like outside of a club, like you're not going to hear very much of the high end, and you're just going to hear like a kick going like, and it's going to be like kind of reverbed out or whatever. So I like to use lots of convolvers in my music to sort of put something into places. I feel like it's one of the easiest way to do things. It's actually the way that a lot of digital audio effects in general work. The idea is that you take a dry like impulse, so like a click, like a snap or whatever, and then you take a wet one. So I can actually show that. You take like a click, like just like a really short transient that's pretty full spectrum without any reverb. So as you can see, I'm just putting like a little fade on it, so it's like shorter. Yo, Daniel, do you have my audio? Okay, we're Yeah, it should just be a click. So I could then go and like record that sound in a reverbed out area, and then you'd get like, oh, I don't actually probably should have done this in advance. Like you can imagine like the click with a bunch of like uh reverb on it or whatever from the real space that I'd record using like a field recorder or a microphone or whatever. And then the computer will extrapolate the differences between the dry click and the wet click, and then it'll sound like it's in the space. Uh, and then you can apply that to anything. It's also the way that like amplifier emulations work. So like if you have like a guitar amp that you're trying to recreate, you'd like record a dry signal through that, and then what it sounds like after going through the guitar amp, and then you'd be able to get like a math function that you could then apply to any sound. So in a more recent brief that I was given, which was this, the first thing I did was I saw that there was rain in it, so I got like a bunch of rain sounds, and then I put those in like through convolvers in an outdoor space, and I opened the track that way. It wasn't necessarily directly for this video, but I wanted to represent the space in this video, so that's kind of how I started it out. And then I thought about like all of the brick structures here, and thought about the ways that like piano might reverberate off of that. And then in the track that I wrote for this, I put like convolvers on those sounds to make them sound like they're existing in that space. So here, I'll play the track that I did for that.
Are we gonna get DMCA'd for this?
No.
Okay, good.
Station's coy, water droplet boy, adorning idle balls.
So also a lot of the way which I'll get into in a sec, that I'm programming the sounds is also like I'm trying to use sounds like when I'm scoring the music to a thing, I like to make the thing feel like it's coming alive from the sounds that exist within a space. So like a lot of the percussion that I'm using, I'll like have longer pitch envelopes on stuff to sort of emulate the sound of like water droplets. So like the pitch will be like decaying longer. And a lot of the ways that I like to achieve these textures that I will then put into convolvers is by looking at the spectrum while I'm programming sounds. So a lot of people are pretty used to seeing sound like this, where it's like a bunch of waves in series. And so you have like shorter waves and the longer waves where you have like a longer oscillation through the air of like pressure moving back and forth is a lower pitch, and then pressure moving very fast is a higher pitch. And what a Fourier transform is a math function that will measure each of those cycles and figure out how to reconstruct them using sine waves, which is like an individual harmonic. So if I just play like an individual sine wave, you can see that tone represented on this graph is like an individual like line. And then as I introduce other harmonics, you can see other lines starting to form. And so like in a synth, like I don't know if you guys have seen additive synths, but it's essentially the idea that you have a bunch of these individual sine wave oscillators of like these individual pitches where you can keep adding and stacking them up on top of each other in like intervals and ratios pitch wise. So you'll have like something that might be like 30 hertz, and then it'll stack another sine wave like 60 hertz above it, and then like 120 hertz or whatever. This is called a spectrogram. So this is like a spectrum view. Yeah, I guess that's that's what I'd call that. And so I often find that by sort of making textures look a certain way in the spectrum, I can sort of get them to be reminiscent of, that it sort of connects in my brain with the area and the textures of stuff around it. Not only because I'm looking at the spectrogram, but because I feel like sounds sort of like naturally, fit into that space. Like for example, here is an additive synth, and so if I wanted to get like, a goopier sound, I might like, or like a wavier sound or whatever, I might like, use effects that are going to put waves in the sound. So some ways that I like to sort of be really conscious of the ways that sounds are moving in the spectrum is by starting very simple. So one of the things that I've been doing a lot to get like a lot of higher end textures and like layers that really, add other dimensions to stuff is by just starting from sine waves and putting delays on them. So kind of like drawing like pictures into the spectrum as detailed as I can. Whoops. So like here, I'll start with sine wave. First thing I'm noticing is that there's these clicks at the start and end, which are actually from the wave starting at a point that's like a little bit up. So I'm just going to put a little volume envelope on the start and end so that it's not just like clicking in and out of existence. So we get like a smooth in and out. There we go. So then I'm going to use this frequency shifter to sort of like draw a shape with this sine wave. So frequency shifter is literally just moving all of the frequencies in the spectrum up or down. So that now I have like a triangle. I'm actually going to make this a little bit longer so that it's easier to see what's going on. So one of the first things that I like to jump to after like sort of making a general shape of what I'm going to go for. So I'm going for something a little bit smoother here. I'm going to try to make a sort of fractal pattern because I think those are pretty interesting. So I'm going to start by putting a reverser on it. So just like a reversing delay. These are not too hard to find as free VSTs online, since it's literally just a delayed version of the signal that then reverses it. So if that's the initial signal going in, then I'm going to reverse it by 4 quarter notes, because 4 out of 16 is just a quarter, to whatever tempo my digital audio workstation is set to. So there you can see it playing back. I have the dry wet to like 50%, so it's playing evenly the dry signal and the wet signal at the same volume. So you can see it like playing back both overlaid. so that if I want to use my knowledge of math to make a fractal, I can sort of have this effect repeating and moving exponentially. So I could add something, or I could start maybe smaller, so like in a 1. Then I could go to like a 2. So we start to get patterns like that as like we're copying reversed versions of it, and then I'm just gonna copy it over and move it up exponentially to get like some sort of fractal pattern. And then depending on what I'm doing, like you know, I probably should have prepared like an image to really specifically make a sound to go in, but already with a sound like this, it feels like just listening back even without looking at the spectrogram, it feels like something that would be like, more mystical, like in an encounter with like an unknown in like a Pokemon game or something like that, with it being like these really like specific geometric shapes that are like repeating themselves over and over. Maybe if I want to make it like a little bit trippy, I might like use a delay, because like I guess like in certain headspaces you can find yourself in, like you might see like trails on your hand or something like that when something's like getting a little funky. So I might use like a really short delay to give it like almost a little bit more of a psychedelic sort of touch. And I could sort of like smear and move the audio around using effects like that. Like if I make more like smooth sort of movements in the audio, it's gonna have like more of a goopy sort of liquid sound to it. Whereas like when stuff seems a little bit sharper, you can imagine it existing in like a little bit more of a dry environment. There's another effect that I really like to use to draw into the spectrum called the disperser, which is essentially just like a bunch of all-pass filters layered up. An all-pass filter being like a filter that like inverts the phase of one section of the spectrum. So essentially what it's doing is like in a piece of audio, you have like this being the positive polarity, like the top half of the wave, and then the bottom half being like the negative part of the wave. So by inversing the polarity, it's like switching where is positive and where is negative. But then it's only doing that for like one portion of the spectrum. And then it turns out that when you layer a bunch of these all pass filters up in an effect like this disperser, you can actually delay a short part of the spectrum. So if I set that to be like a saw wave, and what I'm just going to do is I'm going to stack up like a ton of these dispersers. You can see it delaying this lower part of the spectrum here. It's kind of tiny. Here, I'll move it up. Yeah, you can see wherever this frequency is corresponds to where that part of the spectrum is being delayed and pushed back in time. So what I like to do with this is I sort of like to create shapes drawing within a sound that I've already established. So maybe this might be like something a little bit more melodic that fits into like an instrument the character is playing in the universe or something like that. But then like I might sort of fit it into the environment by like drawing, goopy shapes into it or whatever. So yeah, does anyone have any questions about any of the things that I shared?
I have a bit of a question if I can hop in.
Yeah, please.
Or more of a comment. In both of those examples, something I thought was really cool is that you like stacked a bunch of effects to like set up patterns, and like these big systems, it made me think of like a house of cards where you're just like building the structure, and then once the structure is built, you just start tweaking knobs and like destroying it. And because everything is like built on itself, you get these really crazy effects because it just chains all the way down. And that's cool to me.
Yeah, totally. A lot of the ways that I like to write music is by trying to be really aware of how sounds work on a very fundamental level, like understanding what sound is and what an effect is doing. Like another thing that I really like to do is instead of like using like a chorus or a delay effect, that's just like in Ableton. Like I could just like load up a chorus effect, but instead of that, I kind of like to make my own choruses. So like what a chorus really is it's just like a short delay that's repitching around. So as you like move the time setting on the delay, it's going to like pitch the sound up and down to like compensate for the time being moved. So like here, if I play the sound and then move the time down, actually here, I'll make the dry wet. So this is like only the delayed signal. It's going to pitch down if I move the time down. It's going to pitch back up if I turn the pitch back up. So you can kind of like make a chorus out of layering that with the dry signal. So I have a rack here where in one chain is just the dry signal, and in the other chain is the delayed version of the signal. And then I can just like move the time up and down slightly to sort of make like a flanger or chorus effect or whatever. And I can, you know, like make adjustments to it or like make it stereo by panning two of the delays that are pitching it around slightly differently. Like here you have like a phaser effect with it just sort of frequency canceling out as you have like slightly different pitch variations. So I could also, you know, if I wanted to go for something like a little bit more sharper and aggressive, if that's what the environment calls for, you know, I can make like spiky automation. It's going to sound like a little bit spikier than, you know, well, a goopier movement where I'm like, you know, working with more rounded shapes. Yeah.
You said that bass sound was just the saw wave, right?
Yeah, this is just a saw wave.
Crazy.
I feel like when I'm doing like spectrogram art type stuff, I really like to mess around with wave tables as well, because and also voices. Like you can sort of get like a lot of really interesting formants out of like or movements out of like formants and voices and just filters on more complex waves, I guess. But wavetables are like a pretty obvious one since you know you have a lot of control over the bass sound that's going in. Like if I go to like a format setting here, like you know you're getting you know a lot of very clean and immediate movement out of just moving stuff around and just moving the oscillator around.
What kind of imagery did you employ in that song that you just played? Like, if you were, like, would we see anything if we were to throw that into a spectrogram? Like, what were you thinking of when you made that one?
In this one, I was thinking it actually doesn't like show up super well. There's like a few sounds in here that I think are really stand out. I don't know if I'd have the stem for that, but there's like a sound in the background that like I used a bunch of dispersers on. It's like the tippery like groaning one with the resonators on it. It's like the one that's sort of like exponentially going down and getting slower. when I was working on that, I was looking at the spectrogram and I was trying to sort of make it look like rain falling, because that was like a big theme.
As friendly strangers, bright like fireflies, flutter in my eyes, scattering that light. Take this stand at home.
There's also like a bunch of sounds in here, like they're not really coming through in the spectrogram, but I think the more important thing is to just like keep it in mind. Like it's usually I mean, when you're putting together so many different sounds, it's kind of hard to see how stuff looks. I honestly probably could have been much more clever about it. An artist that I'm really inspired by, False Noise, puts a lot of care into how the spectrograms of his entire songs look, but for me, it's mostly a sound design tool, honestly, and like a way to generate ideas for how I can make textures and sounds and background elements fit in much better to stuff.
Yeah, that was kind of another question I had of like, when do you stick to the spectrogram and when do you like depart? And how often do you find the visual representation of what it looks like in the spectrogram actually like sounds like the thing like physically that you're trying to make happen?
I mean, the obvious answer would be that it depends.
Right.
Which obviously isn't very satisfying. Here, I can show. This is
Sorry,
a
we're looking for
track.
black and white answers only. Yes or no? No, just kidding.
Yeah, no, it really depends. This is a track that I'm working on. I can't talk too much about it, but it's like a track that I had the spectrogram very much in mind. I'm very satisfied with the track because of that, but it honestly is a little bit less musical because of that. But then also, I feel like that sacrifice in musicality also caters to the environment that I'm trying to program the song for much better. Like it's probably one of the most like environmental songs on this record that I'm working on of any of the songs, and I think it represents the universe almost better than any of the songs. But as this is definitely a song where it's almost like entirely based on that, and a lot of the sounds that I produced for that have made their way into other parts of the record, and really accentuate and make the other parts of the record that much stronger and more like ingrained in the universe. Like actually, it was really funny when working on this. I probably spent like as much time working on visuals outside of it, like doing 3D renders and working in Illustrator, doing typefaces and stuff like that, so that I could embed those into the audio to make, the sounds really come alive. And like I'm really thinking about the way that like my type works with the movement up and down, and the way that I want things to feel, so that there's like this really deep connection between, the music and the space that it puts me in, and the visuals that I might use with the music as well, and the visuals that I want people to see when they listen to it.
Right. I find that a lot myself as well. I actually don't really look at a spectrogram when I'm doing things, but like I'm always trying to evoke some kind of, as much as I can with each sound, I'm trying to evoke some kind of an image or some kind of like a feeling of like a material or something. Like I got made fun of publicly for asking someone about synesthesia, but it kind of is synesthesia in a way.
Yeah, kind of. It's always really funny. The guy who I'm really inspired by, False Noise, who like I've had so many conversations about this with. Whenever we're like producing in a session together, a lot of the communication is less like, can you make it? It's actually much more literal than a lot of the communication I have in like sessions with other people, because like and it works so much better because of that. Like some of the best sessions I have are where we have like these very literal discussions about the imagery. Like, can you make it sound like a metallic shell rolling up with each of the like, or like a metallic centipede or whatever rolling up with each of the little pieces of chitin on it, like clicking together, but as if they were metal or whatever. And then we'll like, go in and find like, these really specific tools and sounds to apply these tools with that make that sound, and then we'll be so much more satisfied with that piece of audio going out, having thought very hard about the way that the sounds would come together and fit in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
It's really cool that it would affect the language that you can use to like talk about music. Just like provides a whole other like dimension of like language you can use instead of
Totally.
like, yeah.
Actually, I mean, even in a more literal way, I literally created a language to use as visuals in the track I played.
Something that something that happens, you can eventually get to a point where, and you should strive to get to the point where you're not thinking of things in terms of, like, say when you're going to select a sound, you're not thinking of in terms of like literally what the sound is. How do I put this into words? Like, eventually you just start to get a sense for these kind of things that Hudson is describing, so that it's like, okay, if I want a sound that's metallic, maybe I don't necessarily want to use a field recording of metal. Like, maybe none of my recordings of metal have the right character to them. Maybe they don't sound right, but I know that putting a short delay on things makes things feel metallic. Or like, I know that, like, say maybe I don't have a recording of someone hitting on a huge tank, but I know that if I put this kick drum through a reverb, it'll make it sound like someone, like a huge cavernous space, right?
Oh yeah,
And
even literally with the hybrid. Sorry for interjecting. Literally with the hybrid reverb in Ableton, like you could go in there and you can click like plate, and then you can go choose like a metal plate to put on your kick.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's good to always try to kind of put yourself into this headspace about thinking of sounds less literally and more about what they evoke, and then you start to kind of develop a sixth sense for that, at least for me.
How did you like come to these like these like tools, I guess? Like, was it like stuff were you just like experimenting with things, or like, oh, if I just stack all these effects I get this cool thing? Or is it, I don't know, kind of passed through like mentors or peers or something like that? Or I don't know, I'm just thinking about like someone like myself who doesn't have quite as much of a sixth sense for those types of like processing effects that you can get. Like, what are the best ways to like get there?
A lot of people will disagree with me on this one, but there used to be this old joke on the forum that I used to be a part of, where it was like, there's this whole snare drum thread, and then eventually it got kind of out of hand, and people were all like, "Oh, so you're just gonna like skin the goat to get the drum because making a snare yourself wasn't enough." Or whatever.
Yeah, classic.
And then, but I genuinely think that's a really great way to learn, and I think that like being more in touch with your tools is better. Like I actually think that the dude who decided to become a goat farmer and raised goats so that he could like skin them and probably is way more in touch with snares than I would ever be, because he's probably thought a lot about the impact and like the way that the sound is moving. I feel like a lot of the way that I've like learned and come to these conclusions is by like thinking about the physics of the sounds and what actually brings the sounds together, like physically, and with like with how each wave can be broken down into individual sine waves. Like, that's just physics and how sound works and how you can measure things out. Like I've actually been learning a ton, and I've been thinking a lot lately, even further in depth, and getting some of my coolest sounds lately by like programming plugins. Like if you have a copy of Ableton, you can just open Max Audio Effect and you can go in there, and then all the documentation is great. And it'll teach you so much. Yeah, I would say that like I think one of my stronger points in music personally definitely also comes from just like being my interest in math and physics in general, and I wouldn't consider myself to be extremely educated in that by any means, but you know, I feel like there's so much to explore that can really like take what you're doing to the next level, because it really is all applicable in every way.
Totally. There's such a cool moment of when, you're so familiar with kind of a concept that you can just think of the result, kind of like what Jesse was saying, where you're like, metal sound, boom, sine wave multiplied against itself, or add a delay, like, let's get this metallic. And then your fingers just know what to do. But I'm just thinking about my development through like music, where like that kind of, or like theory and stuff like that is more natural to me, just like the grind of getting through that and just like the hours spent like fiddling around and like trying to apply stuff that I know. It's just like such a process, and the deeper that you get into it and the more that you get like on to the ground floor, definitely the more that you learn along the way.
Yeah, I guess that the way I write a lot of music too, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna like go way over time here if I go too in depth with this. So sorry if my explanation isn't very good, but a lot of the way that I understand theory and writing music in general comes from playing the guitar. And so a lot of the way that it's very intuitive to see a string vibrate, and then to know that if you like play it halfway through, like half the distance, then it's going to resonate like twice as fast. Like that's something that you can interact with very physically that can help you understand like an octave is like the cycle of the wave will be half as long, it'll be twice as fast. And so when I'm a lot of the way that I feel like I actually came to these conclusions about like the way that I program sounds actually also comes from theory, but also I guess coming from theory in the place of like considering the way it works mathematically. I'm really inspired lately by like just intonation tuning, where you're like working with much simpler intervals, because like there's like I don't remember what it is, but in order to fit like 11 notes within an octave, you have to do some really weird ratio that you move each thing up with, which is great because then you can key change and stuff like that. But I think it's also, you can get, you can understand music very deep by like experimenting with other ratios between notes, and understand melodies and get even catchier stuff by like knowing why you have 11 notes like crammed into this space and whatever.
Right on.
Exponential growth functions for the win.
Yeah.
Hitsadis says in the chat. Amazing. There's so many cool effects that come from just like the beats and whatever harmonics that are created with like two frequencies played against each other that you never know what you're gonna get sometimes.
Well, that's something that I'm sure you have a really good sense for, Julian, is like whereas I might be good at like designing crazy sounds and stuff, like you're so good at writing music and just like sitting down to like write a melody. Like I'm sure you can just like feel something and instantly know what it is that you need to evoke that specific feeling moment to moment. I think there's a lot of crossover between sound design and music in that sense. Like I can kind of get to the point where I can kind of feel in my head what needs to come next, but I really need to fudge around, moving notes around to kind of get there. And like that's something I just don't have a feeling for. But it's a similar thing. It just becomes a reflex at a point.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, improvising with an instrument could be really helpful for that. But I won't get into that.
Yeah, totally. That's a whole other thing.
Well, you have any closing words?
Oh yeah. Just well, actually, on the subject of like thinking of what comes next in music, I would really encourage everyone to like take a minute before writing a piece of music to meditate and to see what comes to mind, what imagery comes to mind, what melodies might come to mind in general. So that like my best ideas come when I'm not staring at the computer, honestly, personally. And I mean, I know that's not necessarily the same for everyone, but my best ideas come when my eyes are closed and I can really like try to use my mind's eye to you know, really pick apart a melody or find what the most catchy thing is, because that's the place the most catchy things will come from. It's the place where catchy ideas get stuck, and it's the idea where I think catchy ideas are generated. But if you don't have a mind's eye, then I think learning a lot of the math can help you.
Right on.
Yep, I'm good.
Okay. Hello, everybody. My name's Jesse, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about resampling and multiband processing, and I'm just going to show some of the ways that I make sounds. And by all means, shoot out any questions as I go, because I'm just kind of making it up as I go along. So, one of the things that I spend the most time on is just making sounds and building up a library of sounds, because I don't always have ideas or motivation really to actually write music. And when I'm in that mode, when I don't feel that I can actually sit down and write a melody or contribute to any of my projects, what I'll do is I'll just create crazy sounds, either from scratch or taking something that I already have and processing it further. And that's what resampling is. Resampling is when you take something that exists, you create a sound, and then you take that sound and you process it further and you make it into something different. And that's a really, really powerful concept, because I mean, you can do so much with it, and especially when you have these huge chains of audio, you can get bogged down either by the limits of your computer or just mentally. And taking something that exists as raw material and reprocessing it, you have a lot of freedom that way. So I'm going to show you something that I was messing around with earlier. Now, something that every game needs monsters, right? If a game doesn't have monsters in it, it's barely a video game, in my view. So I'm going to make some monster sounds. All right, so step one. Here, I'm just going to set a region here. I'm going to loop this selection. Okay.
Oh, Jesse, your monster sounds are you barely did anything.
So that's it. That's all you have to do to make some monster sounds. That's my talk. No, it's not.
Absolutely insane.
Mind blown.
So I'm gonna pitch this down to make it actually sound more like a monster. I am transmitting. I will. I'll send you the new link. Let me know if that is working. Okay. All right. So, where should I start? Well, let's start with OTT, which is one of the secret weapons that you hear in most modern electronic music. It's multi-band compression, so you have a high frequency range, a middle frequency range, and a low frequency range, and you're applying compression to each of them. And by default, it applies more to the top and bottom end, but you can adjust this. So I'm just bringing up the high end to bring in some of that information that got lost. Anyways, so let's make an effect rack. If you don't use Ableton effect racks, you should, because they're one of the best things that Ableton Live has. It's basically a way of containing chains of effects and controlling them. So let's let's actually I'll expand on the idea of multiband processing here. Multiband processing is basically just splitting things into high, middle, and low, and applying separate processing to each of them. So so this is applying compression to each band, but you can do anything on each band. If you one way of doing it is to make a rack. So I'll make I'll put an EQ here, and then I'll start this with a low cut. I'll put it at about 1K. So then we're just getting the frequencies above 1K. Then I'll put a high cut. This at about 100. Right. And then let's I'll do a high cut and a low cut. So then you have more or less the same sound going through. EQ8's not perfect, but you have basically the same sound, but it's split up into 3 channels. And then you can affect these things differently, because you want to do that often, especially with really crazy electronic sounds, because the volume and the frequencies of what you put into effects has a huge effect on what the effect actually sounds like. So what can we do here? So let's leave the low end for now. Why don't we do a frequency shifter? If you put a frequency shifter at about 50%, and then you shift a little bit, it'll start like phasing against itself. Let's actually compress this a little bit more. Okay. Now, what else can we do? This is basically what I do when I make sounds, is I just I start throwing stuff at the wall and adding a lot of effects and seeing what creates interesting variation. And eventually you'll get to a point where you have a huge chain of effects. And then if you change one thing in that chain of effects, it can radically change the sound. And from that point is when I start resampling, and I'll show that in a moment. But I'm going to play with this a little bit more. So that would be a good thing to automate, to assign to a macro, because that has a big effect on the sound. Here's another thing I really like to do, is to put a vocoder on the sound. The vocoder is really great. for a lot of applications. One of them is you can add high end to a sound by keeping it in noise mode. You basically have a noise oscillator that will follow the amplitude of what you're putting into it. So if you layer that in, then you have more high end. The other fun thing to do with vocoder is to put it into modulator mode. And what this is doing is it's sort of resynthesizing the sound. It's actually a whole bunch of stacked band passes. So just like a really narrow filter, and the number of filters you set here with the number of bands. I think I'm gonna stick another OTT here. OTTs are great for bringing out stuff that gets lost, character that gets lost. You do need to be a little careful about stacking too many of them, but it's very helpful for sound design. Right. Okay, so that's pretty fun. What else should I do? Any ideas?
Grain delay.
Oh, of course, grain delay. Let's do a grain delay.
Yep, there it is.
That's the good stuff right there. So just to demonstrate racks here quickly, I'll what you can do is you take these. I'm going to take everything after this multiband rack here, and you go Control G, and now it's placed in a rack, and these are all in a chain. So what I can do is I just go Create Chain, and now I have the drive signal going through this chain and my effect chain here. So I basically have a dry-wet control. I can also like create a whole new chain here. And you can just do this infinitely. You can do this recursively, and have chains inside chains inside chains, and just have like infinite amount of variation for each sound, right? And of course, I should mention that you have these macros here. So like, you should go and pick out which controls make good variations in the sound. So like, I'm just gonna make this the dry again. So I'll map that to a macro. I'll map my dry to a macro. Sure, let's do frequency and pitch to a macro. And then you just have easy controls here. Okay, so then that's where I would start, right? And then resampling is resampling is where I would just record myself messing around with these controls, and then I would take that recording and process it. So there's a few ways of doing this. One way that's built right into Ableton is to insert an audio track, and you set the input to resampling. You hit record, and then you just you would start recording in Ableton, and then it records whatever is going through the master. And you just sit for however long you want, messing around with the settings and trying to find sweet spots. And then when you're done, you have a recording of everything that you did that you can then process further. So you can just do that and then pass it back through the same chain and record it again. The other method for resampling that I actually mostly use is there's a free plugin. There's a free plugin called mRecorder. And this is made by Melda. Melda makes awesome plugins. You put this on your master, and you set a path to record to. You set a path and a file name, and then you hit record. It's the same idea. And the difference is that it records straight to a WAV file in whatever directory you're working in. And that's just for me, it's generally a little more convenient. And I'll show you why in a second. Okay, cool. So let's find that recording. There it is. So what you can do with stuff that's sampled to a WAV file that would be a lot harder, some of it impossible to do with just live chains here, is that you can pitch it back down. You can time stretch it. Ableton's time stretching is really awesome for sound design because there's all these different modes.
That one's great.
That sounds awesome. And you can automate this this grain size here in the clip settings. You can create an envelope on this.
Oh, and that's just grain size?
Yeah, that's just
For
automated
automating
grain
it?
size. Yeah.
Wow, sweet. Justin, I'm just going to interrupt to get a question from the chat. Hyperscope's asking, how long have you been doing this kind of audio production work for?
Well, I probably started making music when I was about 10 or 11. So that would be like, I've probably been making music for about 13 or 14 years. But I feel like I only got really good within the past 3 or 4 years. So that's it for me. I think I've been using Ableton for probably 8 or 9 years. But like, I don't know. I've always like had an interest in this kind of sound design. Like I've mostly been interested in sound design, more so than any other aspects of electronic music. I mean, I've always been listening to like Aphex Twin and really nerdy crap like that. So, been a almost lifelong passion of mine. But I think today's youth could catch on a lot quicker than I did. I was pretty slow. So yeah, once you have this, a little trick is you can just go Control J, consolidate it, and it'll bake that time stretching into the clip, if that's more convenient. And the other thing that I always do is to throw sounds into granulators and time stretchers. And my favorite one is called Grain Spec. It is made by a fellow named Woolg. He's from Montreal. He's awesome. And this is a combination of a granulator and a spectral time stretcher. So if you don't know what that is, a granulator, it takes a sound and breaks it into smaller grains and then plays them in different modes. So you can like slow things down. That's what you were just hearing. That was granular time stretching. Or you can just like randomly rearrange them to create these like washes, like walls of sound. And then spectral time stretching is related to what Hudson was describing, where you rebuild a sound using sine waves. You're resynthesizing the sound with sine waves, and that way you can slow things down without affecting the pitch, and it'll sound smoother. There's still artifacts, but it'll sound smoother than with granulating because you're actually synthesizing it. So. If I can actually get this to work. There. Let me adjust the threshold a little bit here. This is a slicer. So there you can hear the time stretching. I'm going to put an OTT on this just so you can hear it a little better. Or no, just standard compression. So then what do? I go and I record this. Yeah, so you get the idea. And then when I go back into that folder, I have yet another sound file that I can work with. Oh, I forgot to rename it.
No.
Oh well, it overwrote. What you should do is you should check this so that it appends a unique number every time you record it, but I forgot to do that. Anyway, yeah, so basically I'll just do that over and over again, and like with one recording you can get like huge amounts of material. Like I'll start with one recording. And then I'll process it over and over again. These are all from the same session, just processing the same thing. So I'll do this with like not only abstract sounds, but also just like entire song projects. An important part of the workflow for me is definitely like when I get to a certain point where like I just have like 100 layers and it's starting to get overwhelming to work with. I'll consolidate things down into individual stems, like into groups. So like I'll just group all of the bass sounds together, all of the drums together into one thing and render those out to wave. And then I'll take those and rearrange them. And not only is it easier to rearrange and add stuff to that, but also I can, just like I was doing here, I can process those sounds in different ways. So like I can like open up something if anyone has any comments or questions while I do that.
I have a question. What do you do to get yourself like stuck out of a rut? I find it's easy to like, especially when I'm like tweaking knobs and putting on effects, that I like have my go-tos that I know will work, and sometimes I like want to break away from that. Do you have any tips for like when you're looking for something new? How do you go about that?
Well, yeah, one of them is to try and recreate a sound that I like. So if there's a song that you like, or a sound in a video game that you find really like satisfying and enjoyable, I'll just like really focus and like listen to it and try to pick out in my head what they're doing and try to recreate it. And that's a really good learning exercise. Because it can, you start to get better at breaking things down, and when you do that, you start to think of different ways to use things. Actually, I wanted to demonstrate something real quick first.
Sure.
But yeah, recreate sounds, and also just try like using what you have in ways that are really dumb and unintended. Like take an effect. Like if you have an effect that you like, take that effect and stack it 50 times with feedback, like loop it back into itself. You know, stuff like that. And you know, honestly, just like download a new plugin, like download a demo, or you know, there's like an endless amount of free plugins, and especially Max for Live Effect. There's a ton of awesome stuff out there. There's no shortage of new things to try. Yeah, so
I have a question. How do you sort your sound design?
I
Like in folders and stuff like that. And when you're sound designing, do you prefer to go for like longer audio files, or do you like to do like one shots?
it depends. Like all of these are sound design sessions that are long, and I don't organize them at all, which is bad. I try to, but for the most part, I don't. For something that's more deliberate, like drums or drum loops, or like a really specific sound, like I was trying to make really specific pluck sounds earlier. Excuse me, and those I'll label and sort. But just out of mRecorder, like I don't bother sorting them really, because like that would kind of take away from the free flowing nature of it, I find. I mean, I probably could just spend 20 minutes organizing these, but I don't bother for the most part. For the most part, I know what I need, and sometimes not knowing what I need is good, because like sometimes, you know, I'll drag in the wrong thing and I'll realize, oh, hey, that actually works, or I can make this work. I'm really bad at organizing, is the answer to your question.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, so what I wanted to show was that effect that Hudson showed, disperser. You can actually make the same thing in Ableton for free with EQ3s. So the EQs in Ableton, I don't know if EQ8 does. I know EQ3 does. EQ3 uses linear phase, which is just, it's a method of making an EQ. And one of the artifacts of it is that the phase of the across the spectrum is different. So you don't really notice it if you use an EQ as you're supposed to, but if you like stack a ton of them, you'll start to notice that the lower frequencies are delayed more than the higher frequencies. So you get zappy sounds out of it if you just stack a ton of them. And there's actually a rack that I will post on my Twitter later. Our good friend Clockvice made this rack. It has these handy knobs for adjusting the amount and also the crossover frequencies of where it's affecting. So that's one example of something that you can get just by like trying something crazy and like stacking an effect way more than you normally should. Anyways, this is how I'm writing music now, is and this is like the third or fourth iteration of this. Why is that not coming? So like I started on a song a while ago, and then I got bored with it, so I rendered it all to stems. And then I started rearranging it. And affecting it further and further. And then I got bored with that, so I affected it again. I'll just play this through. And I just do this over and over and over again, and then I'll save everything I have as an individual element, and then I just have a huge library of stuff that I can use, right? I think there's actually multiple groups playing on top of each other there, but you get the idea. All of this is stuff that's been resampled and affected over and over again on top of itself, and then all of it is stuff that I can use later. Yes, I do. I freeze CPU intensive tracks, or I'll record them like resampling, as I was showing earlier, and then I'll either use them in the track as intended, or I'll just save them for later. But I'm somebody who like commits to audio as soon as possible. I try not to keep CPU intensive MIDI tracks around. for longer than I need to, because not only is that, you know, strain on my computer and strain mentally, but also I find that I get interesting things. You know, when I decide that I want to change a melody, I find I often get more interesting things rather than going back to the MIDI and changing it. If I have this, like, say, like a piano line that's wrong, it forces me to think more creatively of how to make it work. And I often enjoy that more rather than, you know, keeping this MIDI around, personally. And yeah, that's basically been my music making routine for the past few months or so, is just taking the same material and you know, trying out ideas, building on top of it, and then taking what I built on top of it and saving that, and then taking that material and affecting it and building it. So then I'm just building up this library of stuff that all works together because it's all built on top of each other, right? Yeah, these all come from the same sessions.
So when you're making stuff, do you find that you're like, or when you're working on a track, do you have something in mind and you make something specifically for that moment, or do you just like pull from the archives and try to find something pre-existing that you've made? I guess, yeah, maybe what I'm getting at is like, is your creative process when you're like designing sounds like pretty like pure in that like you're just experimenting and then you're going to find a use for it later, or do you sometimes have something in mind that you're going for?
Yeah, I usually do have something in mind as I'm making things. Sometimes it takes a little bit of just throwing stuff at the wall to get things going, but I usually will start to get into a groove and know what needs to come next. And the more of a library that I have, the more I can think, okay, I need this to transition into the next moment. I need this kind of a texture to really complete the sound that I'm looking for. And then I'll pull from my library for that. And eventually, like, maybe I'll hit a wall, maybe the track's not working, but I've already saved everything new that I made for that track that I can use in the future. So it's kind of both, but usually I'm kind of in a groove. I kind of know what needs to come next, and I'm trying to make that happen. Doesn't always work, but I'm trying to make it happen.
Totally.
But yeah, that's how I make sounds and music. But I think the idea of resampling, especially, is really applicable to games or movies or really any format, because you can get so much variation out of it. So I think it's something that's worth trying. Relatively easy to do, and you can get endless different things out of it. How am I doing for time? Okay, yeah. Well, that's all I had. Feel free to throw out any questions at me on Twitter or whatever, and at least I'll be around at the end to take any other questions if you want. But that's it for my talk. You can follow me on Twitter, and I'll post those racks. I'll post the multiband split and the disperser rack on my Twitter after. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, hey everybody, it's my turn. My name's Julian, and I'm a composer and sound designer and performer here in Winnipeg. And obviously, you've been hearing us all chat this whole evening. So tonight, for my portion of the show, in classic fashion, I went ahead and made a PowerPoint because that's how I roll, I guess. So I wanted to talk about motivic development in game audio, and I thought that like I can't hold a candle to Hudson and Jesse's like sound production chops, but something I've spent more time doing is studying music. I was a trumpet player, pianist, did the whole university music school thing, and I think there's a lot of cool music theory ideas that can be applied to narrative ideas in games. And like games are just so lush with like setting in general, whether it's a narrative game or not. There's always like characters, scenes, some kind of development in different settings that a cool audio treatment or well-conceived and executed audio treatment can really heighten basically like any experience that you might be having in a game. And I feel like a common theme in this stream is like, how can we use like math, science, I don't know, theoretical tools to realize creative ideas, and like with the ultimate goal of always bringing out the narrative and enhancing whatever media that we're working with. So that's kind of why I wanted to approach this. I feel like there's a lot of talking games or game music and soundtracks where people are like, oh, and then the theme came back in at the end, and it was like mix of, oh, the main character theme and the title theme, and oh man, that made me feel so good, and oh boy, that sure is nice. But part of the conversation that I feel like I'm not hearing is that like, how does that happen? How do we make it happen? So that is kind of what this talk is about. I want to talk about motives, how we can mess around with cellular fragments of music and apply that to a track, and then expand it to maybe conceiving of a whole soundtrack. And then we're going to look at a little jam game that I was involved with to explore that, my approach to that anyway. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about is going to sound like music theory orchestrally, but like this applies to all aspects of music and music production, whether it's like completely sonic, sound design, electronic music, or like totally orchestral stuff. So the first thing that I'd like to talk about is like, if we're talking about motives, we really got to take a step back and talk about what is a theme. Now, like we all know what a theme is in like a game, movie, TV setting. It's like the main, usually a melody that is tied to a main character, be it you're Darth Vader, you're Luke Skywalker, you're the Force, you're Mario, you're blink, we all know it. It's the thing that's stuck in our head. It's coming back. It's getting manipulated. And near the end, these themes have gone on a musical journey and transformation that, by the end of their journey, they're fully realized versions of themselves. But if we're going to be talking about themes, we kind of got to talk about a classical or Western classical music icon, Richard Wagner. So Richard, assigning melodies to like narrative elements in music is like not a new thing. This has been going on for centuries, especially in European classical music. Violins representing butterflies, rains, characters, whatever. But it's really Richard Wagner that kind of took this to the nth degree. And what he did is he composed this behemoth cycle of 4 German epic music dramas, basically operas, and it's called Der Ring des Nibelungen. And it's basically a Norse Lord of the Rings. And why this piece is so well known, why we keep talking about it, is because Wagner introduced this idea of using little fragments of melodies and harmony and rhythm to signify characters, objects, themes, like narrative themes. And they're always playing like throughout these operas, and they're changing and developing. And eventually the music kind of writes itself, because you get all these little cellular fragments stacking on top of each other, telling a story because they were established with what's going on stage. And these are called leitmotifs. And you hear this term tossed around a lot these days. People will say, oh, there's all these leitmotifs in games or in movies. And they're usually referring to these little cellular ideas. So if you hear that term, it came from Wagner here. So which brings us kind of the idea of a motive in the first place, which when we're talking about a motive, we're talking about that cellular idea, cellular musical idea that is recurring. So the textbook definition of that would be a short succession of notes producing a single impression, a brief melodic or rhythmic formula out of which longer passages are developed. I think that's a key thing. So we have our theme, like, but what if you just took the first bar of that? This is like weirdly tying into both Jesse and Hudson's talk, just like the idea of resampling or like splicing pre-existing work. I think that's really cool. Unplanned. The key, you have this little musical idea of which longer passages are developed, or a motive can be a distinctive feature or dominant idea in an artistic or literary composition. I think this is really important too, because while you have your theme, your iconic moments, it's sometimes the more subdued parts of the song that you'll want to draw on to develop your music later on. So it might not be the core, like the recognizable aspect, but maybe a part near the end that doesn't get as much time gets brought back later on. So to me, a motive generally, people talk about it melodically, but either melody, rhythm, or harmony. But to me, it feels like any sort of musical fragment in your piece that you want to draw from. Think of it as like a musical atom from which like the rest of your pieces are being built. So it could be a melody, it could be a harmonic progression, it could be a rhythmic idea. But maybe there's an instrument of some kind that plays the melody, and you think that that's really cool. So you kind of like you pick it out, and you make a note that you're going to include it either later on in your track or in another track, and that'll reference that idea from when you first introduced it in your tune. It could be a texture. So when we talk about texture, we're talking about like what's going on behind the melody. Usually, like, is there one thing or are there multiple things? So again, maybe you develop a cool sonic idea, whether it's orchestral or sound design, but maybe you like capture that however, and then you apply it later on. I feel like any effects that you apply, that can create a thematic material too. Again, like Jesse and Hudson demonstrated how you can use the same signal chains to apply the same effects to different samples. But I was thinking recently about the game Hades and how it's a game about Greek gods, usually in the underworld. And there's lots of voiceover in that game, and you encounter a lot of gods, and they all have like this crazy cool delay process and like what are they like choruses, the whole gamut of like sound design processing effects when you talk to the gods. But then if you talk to like a more mortal character, they're dry, or like there's somebody else for every different like type of god that you encounter, whether they're from Olympus or in the underworld, there's a slightly different processing effect applied to them. I thought that was a cool idea of using this motivic development but to use on voiceover processing. Yeah, and the same goes for recording techniques. Maybe like maybe something is like recorded really raw. Maybe that's like an idea that you introduce at the beginning of your game, and then maybe another character is, or something else is really like well recorded in a very clean environment. That could be like a motivic idea that you keep running through pieces. So we talked about what a motive could be. So I wanted to talk, the next thing to talk about would be how to develop them. And rather than kind of talking about it, I thought maybe I would more demonstrate it, and going to demonstrate it with a more classic musical idea. I'm just going to move stuff over here with maybe you've heard this one, the Mario theme song. Just as a refresher, this is how this song that nobody's heard of goes. What's next? Okay, so that's Mario. So we're gonna analyze the motive here, and we're gonna see what kind of content we can draw out of the very first bar out of Mario here. So we're gonna look at. Okay, so that is our idea. So we're gonna look at each aspect of it musically. Let's start looking at the pitch content here. So what are the notes? We have E, 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 C, E, G. So those are the notes of a C major triad here. So if you have the C major scale and you take the first note, the third note, the fifth note, that is a C major triad. And if you break it up, we call that an arpeggio. So anytime you play notes from the C major scale in a broken fashion, that is an arpeggio. So here we have these three notes. So that's our pitch content. So what happens in the next phase of the melody? And then the notes, it starts in the middle, it goes down, and then it eventually ends high. So it's going up. And the very next thing that happens in the melody is that the C arpeggio goes down. So we have C, G, E. So here we're already developing the notes of that were introduced in the very first bar. So we have E, G, C, E, C, G going up, then we go C, G, E. So another thing to note, we started in the root position of C major. So C is at the bottom, E is in the middle, G is at the top. But then right after that, we switched to the first inversion of the C major chord, so where C is at the top, G is in the middle, and then E is at the bottom. So again, these notes have been developed. They're playing in a different order, and they were going down when they were going up before. So then right after that, so those next few notes are a low G, E, and a G on top. Again, all notes of the C major scale. So that's pretty cool. Again, these pitches are being developed. And then there's nothing really that's going on after that. But then in the last section, you have this melody. So here you have the C major arpeggio again. You have a E, C, G. So for those of you keeping score, that's a second inversion C major chord. So again, that arpeggio that was introduced in the very first then gets expanded. So that's the root version. Then it gets expanded to the first inversion. And then later on, it gets expanded to the second inversion. So I think to me that is a very clear use of the material that was set up at the very beginning of the piece. So let's move forward and look at the harmonic progression here. So if we look at the harmony of Mario, I'm just going to play it again. Let's see if I can do this. I can't. Okay, so if we look at the harmony up to that point, basically it's all relates to C major. We have a C chord, we have a G chord, or sorry, C chord, an F chord, and a G chord, and back to C. So those are all chords that pertain to C major. So the way that we can tell the notes that belong in the chords that belong in C major is that if we go up the scale and we play a triad above those notes, we'll get all the chords in C major. So we have C, E, G, and if we go up a note, we have D, F, A, then we have E, G, B, then we have F, A, C, then we have G, B, D, then we have A, C, E, then we have B, D, F, and then we have C, E, G. So we call those the diatonic chords of C major. And everything in Mario up to this point has been a diatonic chord. We have C, G, F, C. Again, pretty basic fundamental chords to C. However, when we get to this moment in the second section, we get this A flat major chord, B flat, and then back to C. So A flat major is very, very distant from C major. You have to work pretty hard to get there relationally. So I want to go back to our definition of C major and what our definition about motives, and back to the line about a motive can be anything that's distinctive. And I think that this A flat major, compared to everything that we've encountered, is pretty distinctive. So yeah, I would call that a motivic feature. And in the section following it, Koji Kondo expands that further by basically using that harmony way more. So it goes A flat major to C, A flat to C, and then it goes back to C major with a D to a G major. So I think that's really cool that this A flat major idea is introduced in such an offhand way. It's the A flat, B flat to C is or the flat 6, flat 7 to 1 chord progression. It's kind of like a tropey video game soundtrack, albeit you could argue that maybe Mario did it first. But I think that it was kind of used. I think it's cool that it was used in an offhand way, but then was developed in the next section. Also wanted to talk about the rhythmic content of the melody here, or of the motive. So we have ba da 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 da. So let's remove all the pitch content from that, and we're just going to play that rhythm on one note. So if we play the whole Mario theme with it, it would sound like we're with one note. Ba 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 da 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 da. Cool. So I'm going to jump ahead to that same section of A flat major to C here, the third section. And if we play that rhythm, or if we play that melody all on one note, it sounds like do 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 ba da 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 da. So now I'm going to just play the first half of that of each phrase. So it's going to be da 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 da. So the first half of that melody is just the same rhythm as the ba da 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 da. So I think that's another cool way of developing that motive by using that rhythm consistently in this in that section. It harkens back to the original theme, and it dovetails perfectly back into the main motive of Mario here. So yeah. Oh yeah, what else I want to talk about? Yeah, if we look at motivic development more deeply, yeah. So I actually wanted to, just say that, like, you can see that by taking one motive, by taking this little fragment of Mario, that we already have tons of content that we can use to develop our pieces and reuse them in later on in pieces or in soundtracks as we go. So just looking at motive development techniques, other techniques that you can use. If you take a look at the melody, for instance, if we take ba-da-ba, ba-da-ba, we could change the register of it. We could play it high. We could play it low. We could add some notes to decorate it, to develop it. So that might sound like something like that. So we're adding more notes. Anything like that, just make it more complex as we go. We could transpose the notes, so we could change it to different keys. So this is in C major, but maybe we'll go to F major. Maybe we'll go to A flat major. But we can, so those are chromatic transpositions where we're literally taking the notes and we're putting them into different keys. But we can also do what's called diatonic transpositions, where we take the same intervals, but we keep it all within the same key. So in C major, we might have on a C chord, but if we go up a step, we'll have a D minor. So we could develop the theme that way. Build it like that. We could invert the theme. So inversion is when you you analyze the intervals, and instead of going the direction that they're going, you go the opposite way. So in the case of Mario, we are going down a third, a major third, and then we're going up a minor third. So to invert it in the purest form, we would go up a major third, and then we would go down a minor third. So that would sound like, so regular, inverted. So a major third above E is G sharp, and a minor third above or below E is C sharp. So we get a C sharp minor chord, which isn't really related to C, so that's like not extremely helpful to us. But inversion can like be used in a pretty loose fashion where you can keep the notes in the key that you're working with. So rather than changing to C sharp minor, we'll just keep it in C major. So we'll just play the arpeggio the opposite way that it was going. So again, regular inversion, but keeping it in C major. We can also retrograde it. That's a melodic trick, and that's where you play the melody backwards. You flip the notes. Something like that would be it, retrograded. Basically, you play. It's like reading the notes backwards, and then you can change the tonality of the motive as well. So the Mario theme is in C major. A major key is generally what we call happy. It's when it sounds happy, but we can also put it in a minor key, which is when things sound more sad. So that would sound. That's like a pretty easy way to change the tonality, but we could also put it in a different mode. That's with the diminished chord. We can make it augmented. That one's kind of cool. So that's some tricks that we can do with the melody. We can also mess around with the harmony of it. So some things that we can do is we can change the harmonic rhythm. So when we talk about harmonic rhythm, we're talking about how often the chords are changing. So if we had a slow harmonic rhythm, the chords would change very infrequently. So I'll use the second section. So here we stayed on C major for basically the whole time until we got to the A flat. But if we wanted to like develop this harmonic motive, we might move chords more frequently. That could sound like. So here, instead of staying on C the whole time, I went from C to F to C to F, then to the A flat, to the B flat, to the C. What can we do to exaggerate that even more? We could like add diminished chords maybe, and then if we try to change on the beat, maybe something like that. I don't know, I'm going off script right now, but you can see that like if we can hold one, if we stay on one chord for longer, it creates more space usually, and if we change chords more often, it usually makes things sound more exciting. We can also start close to the key center and become more distant to it. If we go back to Mario, the initial motive, we would have. So that's just D to G. That's a pretty classic 2-5-1 progression, but we could use harmony that is far away from C major. So I'm going to put a B flat major chord underneath it. So for those of you keeping score at home, we're starting on an E natural here, and in B flat major, an E natural is the sharp 11 chord, which is like a very jazz harmony thing. So the way I'm approaching this reharmonization is I'm saying, what if the E and the G were both the sharp 11? What would the bass, what would the chord be? And in the case of the E, it's a B flat major. So normally B flat would be B flat D F, but here to jazzify it, I'm adding the 7th to it, a major 7th. And then I'm playing the E natural on top. So we're getting an E major 7 sharp 11. Oh, and I'm playing a C in my thumb too. So we're getting the major 7, a 9, and the sharp 13. And then I'm just transposing it up to the G here. So now we have D flat major 7, 9, 13. So that's a way of getting, using the harmony and getting more distant. There's like, I was listening to a Smash Bros. Rearrangement of the Mario theme, and they do a cool thing near the end where they take the motive, but they go F major, A flat major. But I was thinking it'd be cool if we threw in that other reharmonization thing. And then we just go into outer space land, and then go back to our home center. Oops. Okay, so other things we can do in terms of rhythm is that we can add subdivisions to the rhythmic values here. So a subdivision is when you play more when a rhythm when there's more notes in the rhythm. How about that? So again, that's our base rhythm. But if we added more subdivisions to it, it might sound. We would just add more 16th notes there. Things like that. We could change the meter, so we could maybe put it in like a waltz. We could go 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 5 6 1. We could speed it up. We can go, or we can slow it down. And we can have time and double time it as well. So those are kind of like practical examples of things that we could do to that theme. We could, in the Smash Bros. Example too, they like take the melody that's like that part, and they change the instrument every beat. So it's like trumpets, saxophones, then like the piano plays. Yeah, basically every 2 beats there's a different instrument playing. And then you can kind of like extrapolate this to the other aspects of music, like maybe from more production things, like again, maybe effects, certain sounds or music or instruments start very dry, and over the course of your song or your soundtrack, you dial in some like delays or reverbs or something like that. Maybe things get crunchier, more bit crushed as the soundtrack develops, and other production recording techniques like we were talking about before. So maybe this is like the super long way of saying that very quickly you can extract a lot of content, and you can start to see how maybe you could use all this stuff to plan out the soundtrack of your game. And not your entire soundtrack in your game is going to be like based off of one theme, but maybe you have a couple core ideas that become the base of your long form soundtrack, and from that you can start blending these motivic ideas together. Like maybe you have 3 core ideas, and then like in the place that you start, it blends the 2 together. There's a little bit from the main theme A and the main theme B. Maybe the antagonist in the game is like a combination of C and B. And maybe the ending, like the big, say, boss battle at the end, is like the culmination of everything that you've heard, and there's little fragments of everything that you've heard along the way. Using these sort of motivic development ideas, these tricks, these transformational techniques, to really milk and change and manipulate, build, craft, and ultimately tell a story with your music. So I think the next thing here is kind of what I wanted to show. I don't really have the chat open, but are there any questions along the way? I know I just like demonstrated a lot and talked a lot can use a lot of technical stuff. So
I actually do have a question. I mean, maybe you're going to cover this, but
Yeah.
when you're applying all these things in a video game scoring context, are you sort of like when you write? Do you write linearly and sort of like start with the first few bits of the soundtrack and then move on to later ones, or do you like collect these motific ideas at the start and then like write wherever it feels most natural for you to start?
Yeah. Yeah. The uncool answer remains sometimes
Yeah.
a little bit of both. Yeah, actually, I feel like something that's been working out really well for me. You were talking about meditating and kind of conceiving things in your mind's eye. For me, what's been working really well is that I'll have this notebook, and I will just like literally scribble ideas of stuff, and I'll like make charts. I will connect dots, and when it comes time for like scoring of any kind, I will list the physical properties. This kind of ties into what you were talking about too,
Yeah.
Hudson. Yeah,
I
I will
guess what
just
I
like
was saying, like pre-meditating before, I didn't necessarily mean like only use your head, but also just like thinking about what you're doing before you're doing it, so you're not just producing into the abyss.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I feel like the
So
more,
that definitely fits it.
yeah, the more I get into this, the more I like just want to get it close to right, as few iterations as possible. If I cannot spend 20 hours making something only for it to like end in the maybe pile, I will try to do that. And it's also like good practice to, just think about, like, I don't know, if you're writing music for a cave, I would write like, how big is the cave? Where is the cave? Is it hot? Is it cold? Are there monsters? Is it like magical? And I would try to tie like literal musical elements to that. I would be like, oh, it's a big cave. I mean, maybe it's like very spacious and there's like lots of plucky sounds. Maybe there'd be lots of reverb. Maybe it'd be like kind of darker. Maybe lots of like bell type rocky clunky sounds. Maybe it would be slow because it's dark and you're moving at a slow pace. So just kind of listing those properties. Yeah, because I have a super bad blank sheet syndrome. I get really overwhelmed by having too many options. I don't know where to start. And like the pressure of creating kind of like, I don't know, these fragments that you're planning on reusing for the rest of your soundtrack, like that kind of freezes me up sometimes. So just knowing that I have like a solid base of like justification for what I'm doing just like helps me move on. Because I'm also the exact opposite of Jesse, where I will like commit at the absolute last second that I must. So again, just having that like backup of like, no, I made this decision. I chose this instrument because it's a cave, because this is happening in the context. It helps me be like, no, it's good. Just like let it be canon and then move on. So I don't know if that answers your questions.
Yeah, sort of. I guess one of the big reasons I ask is because I feel like a lot of these ideas that you're talking about with motifs and stuff like that are actually really applicable to the normal work that I do, which is just like writing albums for myself and just my own solo projects. Like I'm not usually writing for video games, if I'm being honest, as much as it is something that I have spent a lot of time doing. Because usually when going into an album, the start of my process is to gather all those themes and ideas first before I even start, just so that I don't like derail. I would say that actually a lot of the stuff that you're talking about in the context of scoring is really, as I just said, like applicable to the album writing process, to make things cohesive, and so that it doesn't just sound like a collection of ideas, and instead like you're going in with a story that you've written in mind.
Yeah, totally. I definitely agree. And yeah, the more that you can pin down and like have a general idea of what things will be, yeah, that's definitely way more helpful. And especially when you're building things on top of each other, yeah, it can totally get out of hand. But sometimes like motives will come up in tracks that I'm making that Yeah, so I'll be using an idea that's based in another track, but by making this new track, new motivic ideas will come into play that will end up informing other tracks. So I tried to leave that openness of knowing that like no new stuff is going to come along the way, and to kind of trust that liveness of the creative process. And also there's like a certain amount of like retrofitting that you might want to do too, to be like, oh, maybe I didn't know that this theme existed at the time, but maybe I can sneak it back in because it would be relevant then. So it's a real, yeah, it's a balance for sure. But I definitely agree that it's way easier to make things cohesive when you have a plan at the start.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate. Yeah, this is an example where I'll show of an approach for applying this motivic development across a jam game that Graham Borland, who's the developer in town here, made for Chess Jam 2018. Chess Jam is a month-long game jam. He was working on this, and basically it's chess meets Fire Emblem. And yeah, you're the light side and you're battling these dark counterparts of yourselves, and it all happens on a field, and maybe you're deciding your fate, hence the name here. And basically the only the only requirements Graham asked was that, oh, like maybe the music could sound like Fire Emblem, and maybe there's like a transition that happens when it goes from light to dark. So I'm going to cool. Yeah, so just to go through this, basically the way that the music works is that there's like menu music, which basically was the intent of it was to establish like the before times before, like I was imagining that there are these two factions, the light and the dark, that form that were once one, and then there's like a theme that comes when you're about to place the pieces here. And then so the effect was that this is like the whirlwind before the battle. And then there's like the player's turn, which is where you spend the most time thinking about it. And then when you move, it turns into the dark. Yeah, the dark version of it plays, and then there's a winning slide and a losing one as well. And I think I'll go to Ableton. Actually, I just want to show this game quickly. I don't think the audio is going to come through, but you can see it, and I'll just play some tracks after. Uh-oh. Are you going to work? Classic. Well, I'll show you the music editing, right? Okay, so I've gone ahead and just kind of plucked some themes out here. Yes. Just this here. Okay, so this is the main track that you hear while you're deciding where to move your players. This is kind of where all the thematic content was born for me, and this is what it sounds like. Okay, cool. So that's like basically where, yeah, this is the first track I started with when I was working on this game. And something that stuck out to me right away, or that came about while I was working on it, was this theme, this motive that maybe you heard it. I don't know. Yeah, so this is C sharp, F sharp, A, B, C sharp, just an F sharp pentatonic scale there. So yeah, I just want to show or highlight the different places that it's used. So you'll hear it at the beginning where it's like a response to the main theme. So in the high strings, but then later on, we change instruments, we add some brass to it. Then after that, so here we're changing it again. We're applying, there's a new chord underneath it. So we're changing the notes to match the chord. Notes, bum, 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 bum. So the original, this new version. And then later on, so again, the bum, 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 bum is changing to fit the harmony again. It's getting bigger and bigger. And then finally, it kind of ties the whole thing in together at the end. So I just want to show a couple examples of how it transforms to the other themes, even though we won't listen to these entirely. Oops. But I want to just say that, yeah, so we have this theme that's quite syncopated. They're kind of dotted 16th note rhythms here. It's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. If you were to play those all 16th notes, so so I thought, okay, we have to come up with a dark theme here, and what if instead those are just running 16th notes, but we just use the same C sharp, F sharp, A, B vibe. So that's kind of what I did here. And then that theme transforms with the harmony. Now it was going up, but now it's going down. And then at the end, so finally at the end of the dark theme, you get the original version of the theme in the bass. Yeah. The urgency created with the 16 notes was definitely kind of a goal. Again, in that list of like, oh, what do you want to achieve with a dark theme? What should a dark theme be? Like, oh, evil, urgent. There's that kind of that methodology to it. Yeah, I guess 2 more examples I just want to show. And then it's just that, yeah, so there's this like area when you're about to place your pieces, like in any strategic turn-based game, you know, you just like where your spots are going to go, so you might be thinking about it. And then you'll hear a version of the dark theme playing piano. And then I forget what this one. Oh yeah, this is the end. So again, so it was playing the dark version of it, slightly modified to fit the harmony. But then by the end, we get kind of a weird hybrid of the light version where you get the groups of threes, but also they're playing it's kind of jittery like the dark version. So the intent there was that to go for a bit of a hybrid thing. So then I was also saying that in the intro track, it was like supposed to be the origin story of the music. So it tries to capture like, oh, what were things before? So if we have these groups of threes of the light version, but we also have these groups of fours of the dark version, I was thinking, well, what if it was like a triplet kind of vibe? Triplet, 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 triplet. But then we did it in groups of four instead. So it was like triplet, 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 triplet. And then because it was like when everything was good, what if we put it in a major key? So now we're in F sharp major rather than F sharp minor. Triplet. Yeah, so I'll just play how that goes. The flute is also like a thematic instrument where the flute has a major role early on. I know it's not playing like the melody itself that's like featured in the other tracks, but it kind of dances around it, or at least was trying to. And then near the end, near the end, we kind of get like this dark, oh, it was once happy, but now it means war. You know, just that single tear kind of moment. So, yeah, that's like one way of, I guess I was trying to approach using this one theme that kind of came out in very organically, but it ended up being like a core aspect. I was trying to see like, oh, how much can I milk out of this? Yes, I think that's all I was gonna change. Thanks for bearing with me and like probably substantially over time. But just in essence, yeah, looking at audio at a motivic level gives you access to tons of content to manipulate. But this design strategy transfers over to sound design, other disciplines as well. But most importantly, this kind of thinking makes your compositional process easier. At least it does for me. It like answers a lot of questions right out of the gate for you of like, you know, especially when you're like working, when you're halfway through a soundtrack, you've like established probably a lot of your major motivic ideas. So then, you know, this new thing just becomes A plus B, and then this other thing is G plus B with this little dash of S, you know, and then things kind of come together. And finally, and what I think is coolest is that it gives you tools to use your music to tell a story, which is kind of, at least for me, a big part of why I'm doing this. So anyway, thanks for your time. Are there any more questions? We can, and questions like in general, just opening up to the whole night. Yeah. Worth it.
Thank you so much, Julian.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
great.
Thanks, folks.
I definitely will be thinking about motifs in my own music.
Sweet. Yeah, once again, I like found it really interesting the way that, I don't know, I felt like we were all kind of thinking along the same lines and just like approaching it from these different sort of places of what we were all familiar with.
Yeah, as I was saying before, like a lot of the way that I approach writing music is like I'll, you know, as Jesse does, I'll keep like a folder of sound design and I'll try to name things by the moments they were created and the emotions that I associate with them, in the same way that you kind of like have like melodies and keys that you like to go to for different things.
Yeah, totally. It's all like, yeah, I feel like the end result is kind of all the the same thing, and whether it's a sound or a note or a key or a processor or whatever, yeah, it's kind of all leading to the same place.
Yeah.
Anybody in chat have any questions before we head off? Well, you can follow me. You can follow me on Twitter at Jesse Hamill with an underscore at the end. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing, or shoot me any questions that you think of.
Sweet. My name is Julian Butel. You can find me on the Twitter at Julian Butel. Yeah, just send me a message or hit me up with any questions. Thanks so much, Jesse, for the invite to participate in this and for kind of spearheading getting all this together. It's a lot of fun. Hopefully we can do more.
Yeah. I linked my Discord in the chat. For whoever's still watching, there's like a lot of really talented producers in there and a lot of people who are constantly talking about production.
I think it got blocked. You should get a
Wait, did it?
yeah. Whoever. Yeah, Daniel will post it. Yeah, join the Upscale Discord if you want to learn music production. It's an awesome space in there.
Sweet.
Cool.
Well, maybe we'll wrap things up then and say thank you to everyone who tuned in and to everyone who listened to us talk. Yeah, once again, thank you to Jesse. Thank you to Corey and Dan behind the scenes and IGDA for putting this event on and giving us a platform to like really geek out about specific intense audio stuff. It was like a lot of fun to dive deep. So yeah, thanks everyone, and have yourselves a good night.
Yeah, thank you
Good
so
night,
much. Good night.
Thanks everyone.